Bu İngilizce bir sunum olacak. Dilimi İngilizce olarak belirlemiştim. Bir İngilizce üzerine bir dil bilim sunumu olacak aslında. Travma söyleminde kelimeleri değil sessizliği inceleyen bir araştırma. So, up to now, silence has been known to serve for various interaction contextual functions, but it has a clear pragmatic use value. So this makes it, situates it as a discursive phenomenon. So silence is not something negative as it was known in the earlier times, but it was perceived to be negative, passive, or absence of meaning. But then it has been understood that silence serves many functions, primarily cognitive, discursive, social, and affective. And this has been also studied in sociolinguistics with regards to politeness theory as well. So this is a study, case study actually, which investigates the pragmatic functions of silence in a particular example of trauma. And the baseline theories, I mean, the theoretical framework applied for this paper come from Roman Jacobson and his 6 communicative functions of language and relevance theory by Sperger and Wilson. So this study, based on that, tries to analyze silence from a pragmatic point of view and considers it as a discourse marker in a case study on trauma discourse. But this study, considering silence as a discursive interpretation, is attempted in 2 trauma narratives. So 2 different trauma narratives were the corpus of this study actually. And to calculate the duration of the pauses in the interviews, a screen timer has been used. And based on that, all the inter and intra-turn pauses were identified based on this screen timer. And based on the context and other linguistic elements...
slide oynamıyor da bunda.
Şu an metot sayfasında değil miyiz?
Değiliz hocam.
Ben de şu anda o sayfada ama internet bağlantısı mı problemli acaba? Şu anda hiçbir şekilde oynamıyor mu?
Yok, hayır.
Tekrardan bir yeni
ekran yaptıysanız geri çıkın.
Tamam. Bir saniye.
O şekilde yapın yani. Tam ekranlarda sorun olabiliyor çünkü.
Öyle mi? Tamam. Bir saniye. Şu anda görebiliyor musunuz?
Evet.
Metot sayfasındayız değil mi?
Evet.
Tamam. Tam ekranda problem oluyor o halde. Tamam. Teşekkür ederim. In this analysis, words and fillers were analyzed, and I found out some of the pauses were loaded with illocutionary force in terms of linguistics. And for the sake of convenience, silence in this study is used to cover both pauses, intentional pauses, and eloquent, I mean meaningful silences, which is important in the sense that because a pause can simply be a pause to breathe, for example, which is called intra-turn, or a pause of inter-turn, I mean different people, inter-participants. With regards to findings and discussion, I can say that this analysis consists of 75 tokens of silence, and 300 of them are from affective affective function. So the majority is of affective function, but this does not necessarily mean that in general silence is mostly used with an affective function. This might have resulted from the theme itself, because theme is a trauma narrative. As it's a trauma narrative, it may be related to affective function mostly. Based on my analysis, I revealed that silence in trauma discourse has 3 main functional categories, which are cognitive, affective, and communicative. So with regards to cognitive function, the average of duration of silence has been calculated at 0.6 seconds, and it has a position of mid-utterance as an intra-TCU, I mean turn construction unit. And the following sub-functions with regards to cognitive function are restructuring and remembering. So which means that in the pauses here involved, the speaker reconstructs the sentence which will follow later on. It has a cognitive function, or it has a remembering function. So in such pauses, the speaker tries to remember a specific detail about the narrative. So silences in this cognitive function do not necessarily have to be in isolation. They might as well be followed by further verbal explanations as well, but there are two examples for each of them here right below. In isolation, for example, here as we can see, yani pause en bu şekilde. And then the second example is an example which supports the second explanation here, which is followed by verbal explanations. As you can see here, after this pause, the function of the pause is verbalized. Yani hatırlamaya çalışıyor tekrar speaker and says, her detayı da hatırlamıyorum şimdi. So it is the verbalized function of this pause. The second function is the affective function, and the calculated average duration of silence here is 1.7 seconds, and 3 linguistic patterns has been detected. Were detected regarding its use. Firstly, silence in this function has almost always the position of turn construction unit final, with only highly rare exceptions of mid-TCU. Secondly, the position of communicative silence changes when used with nouns, verbal predicates, predicate nouns, attributive adjectives, etc. Thirdly, the narrator also maintains eye contact during silences here. And there are 2 main sub-functions under affective function. The speaker uses silence to function and to intensify the preceding or succeeding judgment and evaluative opinion, as we can see here. Hani kafama bomba atıldığını falan düşünüyorum, öyle sesler. Hani ölüyorum sandım. And then comes pause. So in this pause, the effective effect of this attributive sentence, this evaluative opinion, is tried to be strongified. Then the second function comes, the function of creating narrative expectancy, curiosity. Bir tedirginlik var belli. Vapur hareket edince de, and then comes a silence of 3 seconds, which is a very long pause, by the way. Havada askeri helikopterleri gördüm. This is the second function of affective filter. Okay. Elaborating on the patterns of the positions of CS, because the positions of communicative silence is important here. When used with noun phrases, only nouns, and also with adjective nouns, communicative silence succeeds them, as we can see here. Pause comes after noun predicate. When used with verbal predicates, communicative silence succeeds them even in inverted sentences. Ağlıyor, in this example we can see, and then comes the pause. When used with predicate nouns, communicative silence succeeds them. As in the example, bir arkadaşım ertesi gün Amerika'ya gidecekti. Özel bir arkadaşım. And then comes the pause. When used with attributive adjectives, CS precedes them, comes before them. Benim için extra korku. So it comes before the adjective, before the adjectival attributive phrases. And finally, when used with adjectival predicates, because they are eventually predicates, communicative silence succeeds them. Seda çok garipti, and then comes the break. So the data here indicates a generalizable pattern regarding the position of CS in the affective function. And comes the final function, the communicative cooperative function. The calculated average duration of silence here is 0.7 seconds. Silence in this function has an intra-TCU position, and the narrator maintains eye contact during silences here. There are 5 main subfunctions here. The first one is intra-turn topic shift. So in these pauses, the speaker gives a deliberate pause, deliberate silence, takes it to function to turn intra-turn topic shift. So he or she, the speaker, continues to speak himself or herself. Her detayı da hatırlamıyorum şimdi, tabii biraz zaman geçti üzerinden. End of a structure, and then takes a pause, and then starts to change into another aspect, another topic. So he continues to speak or she continues to speak. And then preceding or succeeding indirect speeches. So while transferring some other people, some other person's phrase actually, so communicative silence here signals an indirect speech and direct speech shift by preceding or succeeding an indirect speech, and it signals a perspective shift. Right here, as in the example, hani hep şey dedi, pause, ya burada action bitmiyor, comes the direct phrase of someone else. When to quote another person, the speaker uses silence in spoken language as quotation marks of the written language. Interestingly, the speaker uses silence even when to quote themselves with complete sentences. I'm sorry, there's typo here. It should be the speaker because there's only one speaker in the data. As in the example, helikopteri görünce bir de Boğaz'da görünce direkt şey dedim ben de. Hani köprüyü patlattılar herhalde, bomba patladı dedim. And then comes the silence because it right precedes or directs an indirect speech. Yes. And then comes the third function, cooperative function, which is the most frequent function, by the way. Silence is used by the narrator, by the speaker, as a call for cognitive support or bringing the shared information in from the listener. According to relevance theory, what is said and how it is said are contextual and can be interpreted by the listener rather than the speaker, as in the example here. Bir de çok komik bir şekilde anneannem falan da tabii aradı. And then comes the pause here. In this example, the silence serves for this purpose in the sense that comic does not mean in its literal meaning, but means something similar to garip bir şekilde ilginç. And da means bile. So here the speaker was aware that I, as the listener, knew that her grandmother was recently operated from her heart and barely capable of talking on the phone, let alone communicating, which is stated, stated overtly in the utterance. So in this pause, in this silence, communicative silence, the speaker asks for my cooperative function. Anneannem falan da tabii aradı and asks for me, waits for me to react in this way because it is something unexpected. And then comes the fourth function, narrativization function. Silence is used by the speaker here in order to link sentences in a way to compose a narrative together like a story of successive interrelated events. Silence here becomes the place actually where the listener feels almost the same as narrator, sees what she sees. Hani o üzüntü, ayrılık şeyiyle internete girmedim. Müzik açtım, kulaklığı taktım. Vapurun da dışına oturdum. And then comes a long pause. Neyse hareket etti falan. There is a story here going on and it functions in a narrativization way. And in the final one, the last one, TRP function, silences here work as a transition relevance places. The spaces actually the pauses where the speaker changes in a dialogue. Turn claimer here, I mean the person who is going to speak next, thinks that it is the end of the TCU of the speaker, of the former speaker, and now it would be the right time to claim the floor. Senin için travmatik olan bir olayı anlatabilirsen sevinirim. And the speaker pauses because gives the floor to the next speaker here at this pause. So it functions as a TRP function here. By the way, these sentences in quotations in sociolinguistics are directly given as heard from the mouth of the speaker. That's why they are not corrected in terms of spelling. So, of course, some silences can be multifunctional too, which is interesting, and they can function in more than one way in only one place, as in the example here. Bir daha görüşmeyebiliriz vesaire. Onun bir mutsuzluğu var. And then comes another break of the same length. So here we see in the former one, both a cognitive function, because it tries to restructure the sentence, and then comes a filler, and then it has an affective functions because there is an affective and saddening effect here in this sentence. As bir daha görüşemeyebiliriz vesaire. And we are parting our ways, and the other person the speaker is talking about right now was leaving to migrate to the United States. That's why there is an affective function here as well. So here are my references, and thanks for your patience. I hope I haven't exceeded my time limit. Thank you.